Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country or in the world. Welcome to this month's Networks of Opportunity for Child Wellbeing webinar focused on strategies for centering equity in early care and education. My name is Rhonda Alexander. I'm the Director of Operations for the Networks of Opportunity for Child Wellbeing, which is a part of the Vital Village Network at Boston Medical Center. So thank you for joining us this lovely Thursday afternoon or morning, wherever you are. So as you've joined us, you may notice that your microphones are muted, and that's just to help us cut down on background noise. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions for our panelists or for our organizers, please feel free to use the chat box. You can also submit questions via our dashboard. We will be, and we are recording today's webinar, and we will be posting a link so that you can find it after our conversation today. It'll be up later this week. And then also for those of you who are interested in listening in Spanish, we are able to provide live interpretation on our Spanish language line. So if you're looking at the screen, please feel free to continue looking at the screen, but dial into the conference line listed on your screen. So I know some of you may be new with us. So again, here's how you can submit your questions. And you can submit those questions anytime, but we'll be digging into Q&A a little bit later in our conversation today. A little bit about what we're going to do today. You are going to hear from some amazing leaders across the country around what it looks like, some successes, challenges, and lessons learned as they work to address equity for children and family in their communities. We'll specifically be hearing from the Opportunity Knocks for Middletown's Young Children Community Collaborative and the California Consortium for Equity in Early Care and Education. So you'll have an opportunity to hear from teams from both Connecticut and California, and then we'll have about 15-20 minutes at the end for questions. So I'm really excited about this conversation. Just a little bit about the Vital Village Network. I know we share this often, but you can never forget it. On the Vital Village Network, we are committed to maximizing child, family, and community well-being. This work has been happening locally in Boston since 2010. And it's really about fostering partnerships and relationships between residents and organizations focused on building the capacity of leaders in 3 neighborhoods in the Boston area. And we do that through service learning and leadership, applying a trauma-informed lens to align our systems, and iterative improvement and data storytelling and data sharing. So it's a process. And for those of you who were able to join us at last week's Vital Village Network National Community Leadership Summit, thank you so much for being with us, and we hope that you'll continue to engage with us. A little bit more about the Networks for Opportunity for Child Wellbeing. It's a national initiative led by the Vital Village Network, really focused on building the capacity of communities across the country to do similar work. And so we work with, currently we're working with about 11 communities across the country and helping them to build their capacity. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful group of folks, and you're going to hear from some of our mentor and residence communities today. And then I encourage you to stay involved with us through the Now Innovation Forum, which is a national network of peer communities working to promote child well-being. This is just a little bit more about the Now Learning community. You see we touch all corners of the country, and these folks have been working together for a little over a year and just have made some tremendous strides for children and families in all of these blue areas. Here's where you can find the forum, so please join us. This is also where you can find a link to today's webinar and our previous webinars. And more importantly, not more importantly, but in addition, you can also find a link to our podcast series, In the Arena with Now. And I will say today you'll be hearing with our featured guest from episode 3 around cultivating leaders of color in early care. So it's a real treat. Please join us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So without further ado, I want to just share a little bit more about our speakers. You'll notice on the dashboard there's a handout, so you have a full bio of all our speakers. From the Opportunity Knocks for Middletown's Young Children, we're going to be hearing from first up from Beverly Lawrence, Susan McCary, and Monica Bellier. We'll be hearing from them first, and then followed by Dr. LaWanda Wesley from the California Consortium for Equity in Early Childhood Education. Unfortunately, Neva Bandelo is not able to join us today, but she's with us in spirit. So without further ado, I'm going to take a moment to just turn over control to our team in Connecticut so that they are able to control the screen and control the slides. Team, thank you, and I look forward to sharing what you have. So you have 15 minutes to share a little bit more about your work.
Great, thank you. I am not sure if I have control yet. Oh, there we are. Okay. And we're supposed to start our timer, so I'm going to do that too, so we don't go over. So thanks so much, everybody, for having us. I'm Monica, and I'm passionate about our work, honored to be included in the networks of opportunity for child well-being. I personally said yes to this particular webinar topic because for me, I learn so much every time I try to share our work. I learn something new about what we're doing, and my thinking grows and changes. I don't know that we have this 100% right, so I don't want to present us as the experts on anything, but our process and our learning has been incredibly valuable, and I do think that we have value to share in that. And so this blue slide we thought would be a useful way of thinking about our process, the challenges that we've run into, and getting to the point where we're centering children and parents. And this is focused primarily on our racial equity work that we've done the last few years. For me, in particular, the racial equity work is what helped me change my thinking around how we partner with parents, how we value them, and how they shape our work. So we have lots of work to do, and we struggle, but we're very hopeful, and I hope we leave you with lots of questions. And so Susan agreed to go first with our background since she's been with us the longest.
Hi, I'm Susan. Just some background about who we are. Opportunity Knocks is a community collaborative of early care and education providers, health providers, and parents that came together in 2003 to infuse a health agenda into the early care and education setting. So we've been together for a really long time. The collaborative was funded by a 4-year planning and implementation grant, again, it began in 2003, and is still continuing today. And Middlesex Health provides the infrastructure for us to have the collaborative meetings and sustain the work of the collaborative and of Monica. We've been meeting monthly for 16 years now, for a noon meeting where we get the health providers together, the ECE providers together, and the parents together. And those meetings we talk about the work of the collaborative, what we want to be doing and what we want to focus on. Initially, we focused on oral health, nutrition, exercise, and social emotional well-being, but things have been evolving since then. So in the beginning, parents were engaged in the collaborative by coming to the meetings. We had tasks for them to do if they wanted. We tried to give them leadership roles in the collaborative. Mostly we engaged them through word of mouth and through pre-K directors. But we, and Beverly's been with us since that time, and she's proof that, that parents who are passionate could stay involved in this work. But we struggled in terms of keeping other parents involved in the work and keeping them coming along with us. Because the noon meetings are really focused on the providers and not so much as the parents. But parents have always been wanted in the work, but again, our meeting was not truly set up to partner with them. So that's kind of where we left off, and then this has been a new direction now with the work that we're doing presently with parents, and I'll hand it over to Monica.
Okay, so just to orient you a little bit to this slide, you can read it from left to right. So the reddish orange block on the left-hand side, we chose to start with the CIRC stands for the State Education Resource Center. They hosted in 2016 a Dismantling Systemic Racism in Education conference that several of us were able to attend. And that was the inspiration for this orange to green block here that got us started at having conversations at our noon meetings to talk about the complicated connections between health, mental health, education, housing, sorry, I lost my place. Education, housing, segregation, race, and systemic racism. And I think I said this before, but although I was definitely committed to racial justice and health equity, it wasn't until we really started taking this dive that I understood the role that we were playing in that. And so our year starts in October and ends in June. We sort of follow the school year calendar. So in January, we were lucky to participate in a 2-day, many of us participated in a 2-day racial justice training. There were other folks in Middletown, not just us, who were interested in racial justice and racial equity learning. So we benefited from that sort of community milieu of learning. And I'll take you back to the timeline so you can see the 2-day racial justice training happened in January, and we're still continuing to have our monthly meetings and conversations. And then in April, Dr. Gilliam presented on his research around implicit bias in preschool and discipline. And that was great because really our work around preschool expulsion was inspired by his research. And that is one of our goals, is to end expulsion in preschools. We also ended that school year in April, May, and June. We were fortunate to work with Health Equity Solutions, which is a Connecticut-based nonprofit. Claudine and Takesha, the leaders of that organization, really very generously helped guide my thinking, and in turn the collaborative's thinking on what are our next steps and what does it mean to really partner with parents. So we knew that we had to do more than just partner with, or more than just have parents at the noon meeting table, as Susan said. We still weren't exactly sure what that was going to look like, but we were committed to it. And then I have a note here just to say something about Circle of Security Parenting, because we did previous to the CIRC conference and the focus on racial justice. We spent a lot of time focused on Circle of Security Parenting, which is a program that is focused on supporting parent-child relationships, and in the process helps you with adult relationships. And self-reflection is really heavy in the self-reflection, and I think those two things really set the stage for us to be doing the racial justice work. And so at the end of that year, we really decided that the professional development learning, the work that we needed to do, was really the personal anti-racism work. So this is just a photo of one of the sessions that we did. These are preschool staff doing the, what is it called? The privilege walk. Sorry, I forgot. So many of you have seen the privilege walk on YouTube, where people take a step forward if you haven't encountered systemic barriers. And so we did that as part of one of our trainings. We also participated in Food Solutions New England's 21-day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge. That's a mouthful. The Connecticut Hospital Association has done a series of seminars on health equity. The Connecticut Health Foundation has had a couple of conferences. CIRC, the folks who got us started down this road with their conference, they continue to offer those conferences as well. And then most recently, the Middletown Racial Justice Coalition, which Beverly is one of the founding members and steering committee member of, they got together with the public library and and hosted Boston-based We the People to do a series of workshops with us. I have to say those women work really hard, and we definitely benefited from their support. So the Middletown Racial Justice Coalition evolved and decided to center on Black and Brown folks and healing and equity from their perspective, and that inspired us to try and do some white affinity groups and to continue our professional learning in mixed race groups, but also in our separate groups. So that's ongoing. We've had 2 affinity groups meeting since March, and another one's going to start this winter. And I think that's helping us.
Yes.
All right. And so that led us, at the end of that school year, we decided we had been looking on and off at our vision and our mission, trying to figure out how can we incorporate our racial justice focus into how we talk about ourselves, and ultimately decided to keep our vision the way it was. And you can read it here: all Middletown children enter kindergarten physically and emotionally healthy and ready for school success. But we included our anti-racism commitment in our mission statement. So we added this fragment that says, align with our commitment to undo systemic racism and oppression. More or less the mission statement was the same, but we added that to it. And then this past fall, Beverly graciously agreed to lead some more focused parent partnership work. So I'm going to let her talk about this slide.
Hi, I'm Beverly. I'm talking about the parents of preschoolers. We call it POP. It started actually October of 2018. I felt that, since it's Opportunity Collaborative and it was focused on, and their disconnect with parents, that there was focus on providers, that we needed to actually engage parents or center more around Black and Brown parents. And we didn't have that at the table, even though I was the only one. But
and we appreciated all of her willingness to stick with us.
Yeah, I've been here since 2005, so I'm dedicated, and I believe in the babies. So I went to Monica, talked to Monica, and said, like, we need to get parents not be at the collaborative meetings, but also having they're giving them their own space. It's not a support group. It's not getting them to go to a community agency, or, we can give them resources or information, but it's just theirs. It's their space, their time to talk about how being a parent for a preschooler, or, how is the daycare environment? Is it welcoming, or is it, is it safe environment, or are they communicating to you, to parents about what's going on with your child, or you're just getting a hello or a goodbye when you drop your child off or pick your child up. So, my concern was, like, there's a definitely disconnect. So we did, each month we went around to different childcare daycares to talk to parents, and it was very receptive. We also had one at the park. So we were trying to do different things and different, make a different atmosphere, but wasn't telling them nothing, not telling them to go to a meeting. It was just the feel of getting, giving them own space to say, this is, or even like childcare is expensive for, preschoolers, and how can we work together or figure out a way of, what's the best way of just talking about what's going on in our neighborhood.
And I have to say, so this is a parent-only space, so
Yes.
I am providing the childcare. So
Yeah,
I
she's
take all the babies.
yeah. It's just parents only. It's parent-led, parent-focused. Parents only.
And the atmosphere that Beverly creates with families is really fantastic. So they feel welcome and they feel heard. And so we're committed to this ongoing space for parents.
Yes.
And that led us, I'm going to go back to our, well, okay, we'll have to go back to our timeline, but the end of last year, the steering committee got together for a longer meeting, talked about what does it mean to center a group, and because we had been talking about it on and off and really didn't understand it and weren't doing it well. So to help us know who we center so that we can communicate it better with our members, we got together and just talked about what is centering, how is it done, how are we not doing it, and who do we want to center. So we came up with this, it's a very simple statement that we center children of color in our work. And that applies to the work groups when we are talking about, go ahead.
So for the work groups, we have a social, emotional, and behavioral health, and also we have nutrition and physical activities work groups.
And so now when we're talking about what is it that we're doing, what are our objectives, what are our activities, then we ask, how does this center children of color and how does it support families? So that's where we ended up. And we still have work to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
The breastfeeding.
Yeah, we're out of time. If you want to
No, go right ahead. Finish your statement.
About breastfeeding, about women of color. It was an issue that that when we go to the doctors, or when we're not encouraged to, or even family members, we're not, as women of color, we're not encouraged to breastfeed, or we don't get the information, or information that breastfeeding is good for us.
Lots of assumptions being made.
Assumptions, exactly.
And we had a really great, robust conversation about that because we were talking about centering children and families of color. It was awesome. Okay, I'm going to mute us now so you can move.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much. I'm so excited. I'm glad to hear that we already have a couple of questions coming in. So participants, please keep your questions coming in. I am going to turn the microphone over now to Dr. LaWanda Wesley from the California Consortium for Equity in Early Childhood Education, one of our mentor and residence communities from California. So LaWanda, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you are free to go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you, Rhonda, and it was from our earlier panelists. So the California for Equity in Early Childhood Education really started as a pilot 2016 when myself and Neva Bandalo, my colleague, was with Early Care and Education Planning Council, and we both became very interested in equity. I had just finished my dissertation looking at the preparedness of African Americans to programs. She had just been nominated and accepted into Build QRS, Equity Leadership Action Network Fellowship, which is another country. And so as we came together, we start looking at equity issues in early education. From there, we had decided that one of the major gaps that were being under was leadership, and leadership was a missing part of equity. And we knew that we had who mirror the demographics of the children in the program, but we did not have leadership of the children, the teachers in the program. So we decided to start a pilot, all sorts of things, but we wanted the title to make sure it said something about race. And we got some pushback from the county. And with that said, yes, that's great. That's great. We start thinking, well, who's at the table? Is that we weren't getting invited to the table. We were talking about equity, but we're very direct. We're talking about institutional racism. We're talking about structural racism. We're talking how these systems have perpetuated the same reproduction of what we're getting, that is children who are not necessarily thriving. And we need to have cultural in our programs, and we believe and know that leaders are a part of setting that. So you'll see the picture to the far left at the top where it's like you're the set and you're asking to get in, but if you keep knocking, you keep out, and you never get invited, or you're never accepted, or you're never allowed in, at some point on. So Neva and I said, let's just create our own table. So you'll see the graphic on the bottom is my provide an image of like, okay, we'll create our own table with diverse perspectives, children in our program. So that's what we did. And we'll go to the next. Yes, and so what we started realizing.
And LaWanda, this is Rhonda. I'm so sorry to jump in. I just noticed your connection is, your sound is fading in and out just a little bit. So participants, please pardon the interruption. I know sometimes technology is not our best friend, but just LaWanda just wanted you to be mindful that your sound is coming in and out just a little bit.
It's just a little bit. Okay, I do apologize. Hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now. It's probably like every third or fourth word it pauses a little bit, but I think keep going and we'll figure it out. It's just the woes of technology.
Okay. We started to realize third grade was too late to start thinking about how to better support our children. So you will see we know 80% of the brain develops by age 3 and then 90% by age 5. And we start making decisions, it seems as if after third grade, and we're like, we also know, at least in California, that based on literacy proficiency, that if children are not at proficient, they start thinking about jail system, looking at incarceration, and it's like, no, that's not acceptable. We should be thinking about investments in children, and we believe that leaders who reflect these children support that. And if we can advance to the next slide. Yes. So what my colleagues had said about Walter Gilliam's work, really starting to look at the preschool to prison pipeline, we don't want that to be the case. We realize that children are 5 times their K through 12 peers, and then of course children of color expelled 3 times that of their peers. And so you can see just through this graphic where it ends up. And a lot of it has to do with stress that the providers feel like children with the best resources. And again, this kind of influence our thinking about how to interrupt this. And we were like, what if we have more color who really knew how to support and guide teachers in working directly with families and working directly. So this is just one of our one of the areas that influenced us. And if we can, next slide. I like to put the cost to incarcerate. So the average cost we already know, again, looking at the line, is anywhere, depending on any given state, it's somewhere between $10,000 to $20,000. But in California, to incarcerate an inmate, the average, based on 28, is $80,000 a year. And I like to frame it as, do you want to pay now or do you? But no matter what, you're going to pay. And I would assume that everyone on this call will say, we want investments on paying now and rather than later. According to the 2018 data, you'll see that there are a number of children, but disproportionately, you'll see that children of color are the ones that by that. So that's just a quick graphic to kind of wrap your head around who's really being harmed by poverty. And again, this helped influence Neva and I thinking about there and start doing this at the earlier age, not at the later age, and supporting parents in a way that is culturally and culturally responsive. And if we can advance. So what we decided to do is look at our own data in California before designing our fellowship for leaders of color. We said, well, who state. So you'll see in California, our state is predominantly Latinx, those who are white, who identify as white, and then Asian and African American, and then we have other. And when we started to look at serving the children as leaders, it was 60 to 70% those that were, even though our combined minority group make up more than that percentage. And then their next slide. So here are that we have taken upon to center equity in our work. One, we figure out how working with leaders of color in early care and education spaces can be comparative. So we know that those who control the narrative control more. So how do we grow our own equity focus by working with those that we recruit? I wanted to examine and deconstruct research policies and practices that intentionally or unintentionally exclude those of color. And so what we realize, the reason that policies and practice with they are is simply because the research guides it in that way. So when legislators go to, the first thing they're going to ask is it evidence-based? Is it proven? Is it research? And most times that is what gets funded. But then who's conducting the research? Our aim, even in our fellowship, is to really work with universities such as Mills to help us think about where in the literature can we pull out those of color sharing their own narrative about what's happening in early education. How do we start to formulate our own, or as my colleague said before on the panel, how do we undo racism and take policies and say where are our constituents included and excluded? We also know that whatever you finance is what gets prioritized. So where you have a big investment is where you're saying your heart and your mission is. And so we start following the dollars and saying we want to help our fellows start to think about how to better analyze where the money is going in your local agency. Where's the money going in national? How do you insert your voice in that? And so we try to center our fellows in thinking about side with that, with the research and the funding, is also thinking about the data and who is watching the data, because a lot of times we tell anecdotal stories but quantitative behind it, and we think there is something to be said about methods where you're looking at quantitative and qualitative data. And then also we make sure that we seek opportunities to meet with our legislators more than we ever have before. So we're at the state capitol in California, and as you know, that California represents sixth largest economy in the world, and so it's no sense in us having status quo when we have such this here where we can ask for those investments in early care and education. And our fellowship is to prepare emerging leaders who will be racially, linguistically more minded in early care and education programs. And the way to embed them deeply in it is we meet on Saturdays, once a month from 8:30 o'clock, and we also have keynote presenters that come and guest speak for us, community. And then we have embedded mentors in our project. This year we have not 3 fellows, we have 3 mentors who are supporting us with this work. About that, and they are in the role of advising, counseling, hearing them out of session. And then we have our mission statement, basically is to support our youngest learners to develop an understanding of racial inequities, systemic so on. And you'll see that Neve and I continue to embed structural, institutional, interpersonal, personal. And just to be said about this, when you think about systemic racism and how education, we put a lot of, we say to families, work on your personal skills, work on undoing some of the things that have on us. But when we put all that responsibility on individuals and not on, we're going to fail to address what really is at the root cause, which is at the structural institution. So while interpersonal, personal is something we need to work on, we really have to get to structural. And then we feel like that's a way to help eradicate and eliminate some of the policies to hurt and harm us. And then our impact model is basically that we want to look at a 21st century model of education, not based on the 1800 model of education, and that we want to insert every to help help them understand and formulate their own culture. And what you're familiar with Sean Ginwright's work, but he talks about hope and healing in the urban education from a trauma lens. And so we've been leaning into that about wanting to heal out, and then also looking at radical healing, which is to take what you know, go to institutions and look at policies and start to disrupt it, and not just say, now that I'm aware of it or I'm acknowledging it, is that we want to tackle it and address it head on. Our whole goal is to reverse inequitable policies and practices. And with all of this work, we've been fortunate enough to have the California Department of Education for your Early Education Mentor Project fund our second iteration of our cohort. It's our second cohort this year in July, and they will, in April of this year, and we're moving through April of 2020. So that the California Department of Education through the California Mentor Project has been willing to fund it. Earlier is that Mills College is a partner in this work, and so they are supporting our research. We're also looking at, in the future, developing a toolkit and a publication. And then we have recently launched this September with all the support from our community. Is our new nonprofit that is now entitled Center for Equity in Early Child Education. And we're just excited about that. And our hope is to look at the intersectionality of race, early education, and leadership, and be a support to other communities across the country about how to do this work, how to be brave, how to be bold, and to be able to insert your voice into the system so that we start to change it again from the inside out. And I believe that's it for my slide deck, but I'm very much open to answering any questions. This has not been easy work. We do get pushback a lot, but we are in it for the long haul. And we're committed to helping others who want to think about doing this in their own community context. So Neva and I are both here to offer support whenever and however we can.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lawanda, for sharing your approach and the work that you all have been doing. And so I certainly have some questions for both groups, for both teams. However, I know that we have gotten a couple of questions in the chat box already. And so I want to start, I'll save my questions for later. And so one of the questions that we got was, I'm just going to pop this box out so I can see it a little better. This, I believe, was specifically for the Connecticut team. And it says, can you provide some details on the racial justice training that you all used? So who offered it? What were some of the topics? And is it available for other states? And so I'll invite you all to feel free to answer those questions, and then we'll jump right in.
So we started with one of the Connecticut funders in early childhood supported all of the early childhood collaboratives in putting together racial justice training. So our community partnered with Joyce James Consulting for the first training.
Yes, and she was from Department of Children and Family from the state. I mean, she was partnering, doing work with the Department of Children and Family of the state. So she was doing racial equity work with them, and then we heard about her. So the Racial Justice Coalition did the 2-day training.
And so I would say there are lots of really wonderful trainings and trainers out there. The Racial Justice Coalition just did a couple more if you want to tell them about those.
We also did Beyond Diversity. And then we also did, there's also a Beyond Diversity 101, race, and it's a, internal work of racial white supremacy work. We had affinity groups, a white affinity group, Latinx, and a Black group, affinity group. It was more of reflection of internal work that, whatever race you had, whatever race was, what you had to white supremacy work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was good. It was healing work. And for me, I went too. So it was healing work, and I needed that.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Middletown there are groups that are harmful. That I went to one, and it was a mixed group, but it was harmful. And then the facilitator was a white man who was, read one book and, felt that he was an expert, but wanted to do something, but that wasn't a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And I have a few other questions coming in. LaWanda, this question is for you. I know you talked about radical healing and disrupting systemic racism. Can you share a little bit more about that? And what does that look like? And what are some of the things that your fellows are learning in that?
Oh, that's a great one. So around radical healing is moving beyond just individual healing or interpersonal healing within a community, but then it's saying, now that we know more about how race functions and the harm that it's caused, and then looking at ways that how we tend to heal when we're in affinity groups, kind of like what my colleagues have said. When we're in the affinity groups where we have like-minded experiences, shared experiences, we begin to talk about it, we begin to name it, and we begin to talk about ways that we can improve what's going on in our community. Because what happens is if you start doing the healing from within, you're simply going to go back out to society that's still doing the same thing. So radical healing says, well, now we need to take what we know as an affinity group and insert ourselves into the system and start to heal the system, start to undo the racism. And so some of the areas that we talk about with our students is like John Powell's work around target universalism. We talk about things like the peanut butter jelly test, how people associate one thing with another when you start talking about race. And you say Black, you think criminal. We start to look at the Harvard implicit bias test, and they take those tests and find out where they land and do deep self-reflection work. They're reading Resonant Leader to really think about making sure, even though we're deeply seated in race equity, what does it mean to be a leader, and what does it mean to be a leader of people of color, and then to do that in community, cross communities with each other, and cross race work with one another. So they're also responsible for doing culminating projects at the end. Some of them have gone on to work with the Board of Supervisors. A couple of them have started teaching at the colleges and so forth. So these are the kind of things that are happening.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I have another question. I'm going to bounce back to my folks in Connecticut. This says, how are you keeping parents engaged to continuing to work with them? She says, it sounds like childcare is a definite plus. Do you provide any other supports or stipends? What kinds of work are you or they engaging in? And are you all doing any policy related work?
So I'll start and Beverly can just answer.
All right.
So we do still provide stipends to honor the fact that parents who come may not be able to do it as part of their job. So we offer stipends for parents, whether they're coming to a meeting or helping with an activity. And the parents of preschoolers, we provide dinner and childcare. That's sort of a must.
And we also offer a stipend or a gift card and Kid City tickets. It's a kids museum.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Little fun stuff. And
yeah.
Things that we
in books too, in books too. We write books.
So that's parents of preschoolers. Keeping them engaged in the collaborative work, I think, is an ongoing challenge. Parents don't often feel comfortable stepping into the noon meeting space, and so we're still working on how's that going to look and how's it going to work. But we have an expert helping us. I think we'll get there. And then what was the other part of the question?
The policy?
Are you doing any policy-related work?
Mhm.
So our collaborative is focused on systems and policies. So we work with the health providers and the child care providers around just the basic policy that promotes health and well-being, and then we provide some wraparounds to make the incentives there. So if they can't, and if for folks who aren't familiar with the issue of expulsion in preschool, I really encourage you to do some work on research on it. But when we came together 16 years ago and said this is not acceptable, the preschoolers were not prepared. How are they going to maintain children in their classrooms when their teachers don't have training, when they don't have support, just everything that Lawanda was talking about. So we do provide some of that wraparound support in the tiered system that education is used to. So the tier 1, where everybody gets the environmental milieu, so to speak, and then more intensive consultants and referral resources as the needs are higher.
Mhm.
That's sort of the basics of what we're up to.
Awesome. Thank you. So I have a few other, some additional questions that have come up. And this one says, what indicators are you using to see if your efforts are leading to greater equity? And what does the data show so far? So maybe Lawanda, if you can start with this one, and then we'll turn it over to Monica, Susan, and Beverly.
Yeah, the metrics that we use at the first go around and now also the second go around was change in attitude and behavior. What we found that most of our leaders of color, when we call them emerging leaders of color, came into the program, they accepted it. 3 of our fellows in our first cohort had their doctorate and were still serving in an amazing role as teachers, but they had desire to move up. And they didn't know how to share that desire beyond the decade for some of them that they did. And so what happened was, during the midst of the cohort, these same individuals not only went directly to their supervisors and said, I want to lead an initiative here, say around field trips, looking at equity in field trips. We want to look at the parent handbook and look at and see what kind of policies we have in place for parents that are benefiting them, but also may not be. And that same person then also said, and I would like other opportunities here. I've been here for a while. And so they realized they were deserving and they could ask for that. And it wasn't something they could shy away from. So with the help of Mills College, they started to look at attitudinal shifts and behavior and action. And we did focus groups, we did individual one-on-one, and then we also took written documentation. They kept a journal. Thank you, Vital Village, but they kept the journal, and at each session they would bring up things that they were things that they were reflecting on. So their reflections was a part of those, the measuring of attitudinal changes and behavior. And then we were looking at how they move to action in the community, because a lot of, like I said, went on to partner with Board of Supervisors, working with Mayor's office. I mean, things we could not have imagined, running for Board of Education, because they were so deeply seated in this work. It changed them and it transformed them to stay in the community and do this work beyond the life of the 18-month fellowship.
That is amazing. Amazing work. So our results really are around preschool expulsion, suspension, and reduced day schedules. So that data is not tracked really anywhere. So we got our providers to share it with us. So each month the directors report the individual children and the number of times the incidences of expulsion, suspension, reduced day, and then the strategies that they've used to try and maintain kids. And then the number of kids, unique kids who are at risk for some kind of out of school discipline, but who are being maintained for one reason or another. And so the last couple of years, we're trying to get them to now assign demographics to those children.
Wow.
We don't have that yet. And we're working toward that. So, I mean, I don't expect that we'll see anything different from the national data. I think that we have more Black and brown boys being expelled, suspended, and given reduced day schedules, but we don't know for sure yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's our main, and we do have other bits and pieces that we track, but that's our main outcome measure.
Thank you for that. So I have a couple more questions, and participants, please, thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. Next question, and I think this is also across for both groups, and maybe LaWanda, you can start with this one. Are you aware of any quality rating and improvement systems around the country that are implementing innovative approaches to recognizing child care providers from communities of color as leaders? So, for example, giving points to earn higher ratings for leadership that's not necessarily higher education focused. So, LaWanda, I think this is a great question for you.
Yeah, I'm not to date aware of any. I will say I have attended several meetings in California for our quality rating improvement system, QRIS, and we are asking, I mean, there's a leadership component, but it does not specifically look at leaders of color as a quality measure and how they're included in the role of quality programming. But we keep bringing it up. I keep raising my hand. I keep saying it. I stand up. I get on the mic. Right now, there's a lot of just kind of like, nodding at the door. I'm not going to give up. Neva is not going to give up as well. But so far, we are not aware of it. So we just have to keep making the legislators aware of who we are and the leaders at the state level aware of the need and how critical this is. And I think we have to keep capturing the data in our fellowship to show what differences are being made back at the programs when the fellows return to their program and do the work that they do on the day in and day out basis.
Here's an additional question. What are your supports or suggestions for child care providers of color? Many of the providers of color that we work with really want to improve their quality and family supports, but have trouble finding the resources. And I'm open. I think, team from Connecticut, Monica, Susan, or Beverly, do you all have any initial thoughts, or LaWanda, would you like to jump in?
I can jump in. What we've seen so far is when how do we say this? When leaders of color are able to get together and convene as an affinity group, that's when the learning happens, because there's pieces of information about that early care and education community that each of those providers know where there are certain resources. So it's a matter of convening the leaders of color together and cross-pollinating what they know, but there isn't anything specific. I know that there's organizations like the National Black Child Development Institute that's at the national level. I know the California Association for the Education of Young Children has started having affinity groups. You have organizations like the local AYC groups that are trying to get together, but it has to be something that is a little bit more formal. You can look at your local resource and referral agency. They're starting to do a little bit more work around convening both informal and formal childcare providers, but it takes almost the leaders themselves to start the work, to be honest, and planting seeds and having regular standing meetings about how to share resources. Otherwise, it's still like piecemealed out. And sometimes we serve as that role when we convene in our county through our First Five or through our planning council, our early care and education planning council. But it is something that's organic to and unique to the leaders themselves. But we try to make it happen as much as we can, but it has to kind of be grassroots.
Awesome. So I'll probably have time for about 2 more questions. And this question has been lingering a bit for me for our team from Connecticut. I know you all talked about centering earlier, around centering on children and centering on parents. And that just really resonated with me. And I'm wondering, when you say, what does it really mean to center on children or parents? So what does that really mean? And then how is that different from other approaches? What's the biggest difference that you've seen?
Want me to start?
Mhm.
Okay. So it's such a great question because we struggled with it for probably 6 or 7 months to really understand it ourselves. And it was the Racial Justice Coalition that Beverly's a part of that helped us get to the point of understanding what it meant. And so to center, we were thinking about it as who are the most marginalized in our system? Who are the ones who are benefiting the least or being pushed out the most? And if we bring them to the center, focus on what's the best thing for their prosperity, for their outcomes, for their opportunities, then everybody else benefits. So if we are focused just on what they need, our system gets better and everybody's brought up together. And so for our community, the most marginalized group are the children of color and their families. How'd I do?
You did great.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it really did take us a long time to understand and get to the point where I could say that out loud without making mistakes.
It's a process. This is a process. It's iterative. That's the thing. Okay, so I think if we can do them rapidly, I might be able to get 2 more questions in. So the next question says, what training efforts have been effective for providers who aren't sufficiently armed with the tools and skills they need or needed?
Repeat that one more time, Rhonda.
Yeah, it says, what training efforts have been effective for providers who aren't sufficiently armed with the tools and skills they need or have needed?
Boy, that's a tough one. I think, I know one of the trainings we have here in the state, and it also happens locally, when they don't have everything they need, we were seeing, I mean, just to go to my colleagues who are talking about expulsion and suspension of young boys of color, having training deeply seated in behavioral health, and we have something called the teaching pyramid has been really, really helpful. It is a deep series, but at the basic level, it doesn't get to necessarily deep race equity, but it starts to look at children as individuals. It's that tier 1 universalism that if we do this, it'll support all children. I've seen that extremely helpful. And then when you pair with other things, I see the effectiveness of if you could layer it in with race equity work, but at the basic level, yeah.
Just throw in that we found the circle of security parenting. So we've been sharing that with teachers as well as families, so they have the same language. And that is self-reflection. What am I contributing to the relationship, and how can I be there for the other person in the relationship? So it for us, I think it set the tone for how to engage in the racial equity self-reflection and what am I bringing to this relationship.
Yeah. And I want to say I can't forget this. We've been doing deep, deep work in California with the help of colleague Julie Kurtz around trauma-informed practices. And Julie Kurtz, I also trained with her, but she is our leader and she absolutely amazing classroom strategies. And we're also seeing that doing deep trauma healing and holding professional learning communities around trauma, around that particular training and the strategies that are introduced. And then going to the second level, she does a 201 that supports actual classroom strategies. Now that I know what trauma is and how it impacts the brain, how to heal are the strategies that we use in the classroom in partnership with families.
Wonderful. Well, an hour goes by really, really quickly. We have come to the end. I know we had probably 1 or 2 more questions. I'm so sorry that we didn't get to them. But please keep in touch. You can follow up. You can keep this conversation going on the Now Innovation Forum, which is on your screen. I want to say thank you to our panelists from both Connecticut and California, Beverly, Monica, Susan, and LaWanda. Thank you so much for giving of your time and your experience and your stories today. I hope that you all will help keep the conversation going. Follow us on on social media and Twitter. All of our things are on the screen. Now_WellChild and at Vital_Village. You can also find us on wherever you get your podcasts on In the Arena with Now, and we'll share a recording of today's webinar. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.